Hello there, you're very welcome to MyHealth RCSI. My name is Pádraic Dunne, and today we're very excited to talk to you about a really important topic, really that's core to many people's hearts right across the country, right across the world. And the title of today's session is Caring for Carers. This is a really special episode because there are many people being cared for right across the country, but today we're going to give a voice to a really important group of people who are the individuals who care for those people. So this is an opportunity and a chance for us to give those individuals a voice, and for you maybe to learn some tips from these individuals, for anybody who's impacted by any of these issues today. So I'd like to introduce you to everybody who's here today. So on my right we have Tracy, and to my left we have Dr. Trudy Meehan from RCSI, and then we have finally, but definitely not least, we have Eoin. And Eoin and Tracy are going to talk to us about their experience as carers. And we'll start with really their stories, and then we'll go into some of the things that Tracy and Eoin have done to try and cope with some of the stress that might be associated with being a carer. And then we'll talk to Trudy, who's an expert in this area, about some evidence-based tips and tricks that we can use to manage any stress and some coping strategies related to being a carer. And then finally, we'll offer some tips for everybody out there. And I think we're really best placed here with Tracy, Trudy, and Eoin to provide really helpful tips for everybody out there. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Okay, so we might start with you, Tracy, if that's okay.
Yeah.
If it would be great to hear your story, why you're here tonight as a carer for your daughter Willow. Could you tell us a bit about your story?
Yeah, so I am mum to Noah, who's 11, and Willow, who's 8. So Willow has complex medical needs. She has cerebral palsy, she's peg-fed, she's epilepsy, and she is a wheelchair user. So Willow relies on me for all of her needs. She can't really care for herself in any way. So she's also peg-fed. So caring for Willow really is 24/7. We don't have a clock on the hours for care. There's kind of no beginning, no middle, no end.
Right. And so how many years in total then has this
Well,
been?
Willow, I went in to have what I expected to be a typical birth, and Willow suffered traumatic brain injury at birth. So at 4 days old, we brought her home with no hope for a life expectancy. We were told that she wouldn't live, so we planned her funeral, brought home a coffin, and so we kind of just put the head down and kind of just evolved over the years to where we are now. Okay,
so extremely stressful, obviously unexpected. And your partner John was involved?
Yeah, my husband John, yeah. I think in the early days, I didn't want to bring Willow home because I was terrified.
Right.
I didn't want my daughter to die at home and have to live with that for the rest of my life. But John kind of, persuaded me to bring her home, and it was the best thing we ever did.
Yeah.
She was very, very fragile, and she was on NG feed and on really high level of medication. And when she was 2 weeks old, she started to refuse the NG tubes, as small and olive she was, and I started breastfeeding her, and I did it for 2 years. And it was really transformative, and we kind of just put our heads down and muddled through. It was frightening because we didn't expect her to live, and we just kind of moved each day in time, and as a week became a month, and a month became another month, and then we celebrated her first birthday. We kind of just moved with Willow just being Willow.
Sure.
But in saying that, there's an ever evolving grief, because you're grieving bringing home a child that you expect to die, and then as time moves on and you're just celebrating that she's with you, but you're not experiencing being a mum like you would typically, and you're kind of lost in the milestones and all of those things that you're missing. So it's a constant evolving grief, because every stage that would be typical for a child is not typical for Willow. So you're kind of just constantly moving with it. Like for today, I got an email from the school to say that Willow will have her first communion mass meeting on Monday night, and I burst into tears. Not expected, but I was like, oh my God, she's making a communion. And she's in mainstream school, so she's making communion in the school that her brother made her communion in. So it's kind of just catches you constantly, you know. You think, you know, today is just a typical day as it is, and then just something kind of nabs you, you know.
Sure, and you know, we're going to talk with everybody about some of the coping strategies you might adopt on a daily basis or a weekly basis. But it must be challenging for those roles to kind of keep changing. You know, you mentioned, you know, you are a mum, but you're also Tracy, and then you fall into a care mode. It must change all the time, does it?
I remember actually being at I think it was a protest outside Leinster House, and I was asked to come, and Family Carers Ireland were there, and I did not see myself as a carer.
Right.
And it was kind of, you know, oh, right. And then they asked me to get involved, and I've worked with them ever since. And I find that still doesn't sit with me. I don't see myself as a carer, and even though I would use those words and I would advocate for carers, I'm still a mum in that context.
Yeah.
But it's you know, a very significant part of your life, and it actually is all consuming because this is all you do and this is all you know. It evolves every single day.
Right.
But where the shift came to recognising myself as a carer, I don't really know kind of when, you know, you moved to that state, and it's very hard to kind of split yourself into those different roles, and it's pervasive, like it takes over your whole life.
Yeah.
And you suppose you lose yourself in it as well. For a long time I did lose myself, and then I kind of evolved into totally somebody else. I became an advocate. I'm involved in helping others, you know, navigate this space. I work with Inclusion Ireland, Family Carers Ireland, did a lot with Jack and Jill. I'm working now with my lovely friend Gail Ralph, and we're kind of supporting other people, you know. So you find a niche, and through that, like, I've found myself again, but I've found myself as a different person. And would I go back to who I was before? No. And I wouldn't change where we have been or what we're going through. I wish Willow's life was a little bit easier for her, and that she didn't have to go through, you know, the difficult days of when she's not well. But, you know, through all of that dark and murky days and dragging yourself through the dredge, you come out of it and you kind of find yourself again.
Right.
But you will never be who you were before.
No. So I'm sure everybody appreciates listening and watching this, you know, your story. It's hugely important. And just to say to everybody else who's listening or watching this, that we do have a small audience here. You mentioned your friend Gail is in the audience.
Yeah.
But that's really important as well, I think. You know.
Yeah, I met Gail because of Willow.
Right.
Gail kind of followed our little Facebook page, and we met. And Willow just took an instant liking to her, and I would call her my best friend now, and it's through Willow, and she is an absolute rock of support.
Great.
You know, and it's really important to have those people around you.
So thank you, Tracy. We'll come back to you. So I'd like to move to you, Eoin, now, if that's okay. It's a different story, but it's another story that many people listening and watching will resonate with. Can you tell everybody your story, please, Eoin?
Well, I suppose in some ways I feel a little bit undeserving of a title carer. I feel a bit maybe uncomfortable having that label, because I feel that I'm not, especially after hearing Tracy's story, that, you know, like I'm not directly involved in my dad's care, but my dad's got dementia.
Right.
And I'm responsible for his care, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm married to an amazing person. Anya is she's a fantastic support, but she also has a very busy job, and we have two young kids, 5 and 9, and we live about half an hour or so away from my dad's house, and Dad had been living alone. So he was diagnosed with dementia. We noticed something was up after COVID, and I think that probably had a precipitating factor on his condition. We organised for him to have an appointment with the doctor. He was sort of reluctant to go down. He wasn't the best patient.
Right. Okay.
It kind of started with, Dad, did you ever notice that you're forgetting things?
Yeah.
And then he said no. And I said, well, you probably forget that you'd forgotten. He laughed. I said, yeah, probably. And that was, coming out of COVID.
And sorry to interrupt, Eoin, but how old was he around that time then?
He was turned 70, I suppose. He turned 70 during COVID.
Okay, so that's not old, and you know.
As time has gone on, I suppose his condition has deteriorated and his needs have increased. And that's been challenging to manage, both for, I suppose, especially for him, but for me to try and put supports in place and for him to accept those supports. It was difficult for him to accept help in the house when he needed it. That's been a challenge, I suppose, as well.
And when that kind of thing happens, then are you the kind of go-between let's call them professional carers and your dad, and you're trying to kind of cajole your dad into that space? Is that what you're doing at that?
I think what happens, it sort of happens organically in a way, but you're kind of, the first step probably is to get somebody to call once a day,
right, as
a visit, and it's sort of like, oh, Dad, we're going to get somebody to come in for, just a social visit or to give you a hand with the housework, and there's a lot to that. Like, you might not have necessarily a nurse or a nursing carer coming in, but that company for somebody in his position is very important.
So let me ask you a bit of a silly question, right? Two busy people with busy jobs, 2 children under 10, and your dad with this diagnosis. What does that feel like at the peak of it?
Busy.
Right.
It was very, very, very busy.
Manageable?
Difficult to manage.
Right.
But got through it. I think, as Tracy said, you go into a mode of being in the situation and coping with it. I find generally that the tiredness from it as well is, that was something that I had to find a way of dealing with, and to try and make time for myself in it as well, because your window of free time between work, kids, and
it just gets smaller and
smaller.
And Tracy mentioned that there could be an element of losing yourself in that process. It's nobody's fault. It's the day-to-day business of this. Does that resonate with you as well? Do you find that?
Yeah, I think so. Like I keep myself active, and I have a few close friends, and obviously my wife and kids. So, but there's not much room for anything else outside that.
Right.
And like, just at the weekend, I got a phone call from a group of guys, and they were like, "You should have been here." And I probably could have been there, because things, the way Dad's care is at the minute, but like that's kind of gone by the wayside quite a lot.
Right. So there's no doubt the psychological impact, and then there's the social impact.
Yeah.
And it's a social impact of the pressures on your immediate family, but then I'm sure the social impact with friends and things like that beyond that, and work, I presume, as well.
Yeah, like there would have been time when I just have to take time off work, either just to recover from a particularly busy week, or other stresses involved in it, or just I had to bring Dad somewhere, or he just needed extra help and attention.
So, Eoin, it's clear that this is complex. It's not easy. We're going to move on to coping strategies, and I'd love to hear your coping strategies and Tracy's. But before we get to that, I'd like to talk to our resident expert, who is Dr. Trudy Meehan, to talk about Trudy really evidence-based, because in the RCSI MyHealth series, we're all about the evidence base. We are based in RCSI. We do like our research-based and evidence. That's why it's great for you to be here, to give us a little summary about what the evidence base is around coping strategies, for everybody listening and watching at home.
Thanks, Pádraic. And I think, listening to both Tracy and Eoin, you've already mentioned some coping strategies and ways of kind of getting through. So, I'll be pulling on some of your wisdom already, but one of the things I'd spoken to Eoin just before we came on and talking about exercise. And I'm conscious that when we talk about the evidence, the strategies seem so hard to do in real life, because these strategies have been researched in a small group of people over 6 weeks, not necessarily real life for a whole year. Yeah. So anything I say, when you bring it down to real life, it's like you might do it this much rather than this much,
Important point.
And especially when you're a carer, just, there's so many things to juggle, and you're always last on the list, and there's no time or space. Right. So, Eoin mentioned exercise, and the evidence is very strong that exercise not just for your physical health, but it improves your mood. Often when you're out and about, if you're moving, you'll see other people, so it's the social connection thing as well. But you asked Eoin, how does he feel? And often a lot of carers will have that sense of you forget to take a breath. You're so busy.
Right.
And Emily Kenway, who's an author who writes about her caring for her mum, she talks about the feeling of being a carer as a suffocating pressure on her chest. And it just to breathe. And I know it sounds so basic, but as your exercise, to get into your body and take a breath, just to alleviate that tense, that anxiety that builds up. Because Professor Brian Lawler, who has retired now, but he used to work in the psychiatry of later life, he writes a lot about the importance of hope when we're caring and when we receive a diagnosis that seems quite scary, and the danger of fear and anxiety, and it shuts down our brain, and we become less effective. So we can't problem solve when we're scared. We can't problem solve when we're,
Sure.
overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So, and he had worked in dementia, and now there's this understanding together kind of campaign around changing the view of dementia and what it means to get the diagnosis. And we have to look at all the things we can do to support people. So really, and Tracy does it, it's like looking for the hope and looking for my life is my life and my Willow is wonderful. And, when people talk about caring, you're holding the complexity of the whole experience, which is, yes, all the hard things, but also the person that you're caring for. And I'm looking at the bracelet on my arm, and my daughter Mira, who's in the audience, is, we both received a diagnosis of autism and ADHD, and suddenly you're thrown into the caring realm. But this is Mira, these wonderful
Sure.
colours and, the light in your life.
Yeah.
So exercise, yes, if you can do the actual getting out and doing the exercise, wonderful. If you can't do that,
Can I interrupt you there?
breathe.
So, exercise, right? What about just physical activity in general?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
the thing. That's great. And yeah, I'm sorry, most carers will be doing that. You're running from one thing to the other, cleaning up, carrying.
Yeah, but it's a shift to different things. Like I go to the gym and I like like weight and body resistant training, and that's, that deep pressure, and it's a release, So even though I'm constantly physically active, and that's the ADHD, I'm driven by like a Ferrari, and I'm constantly moving, but to step outside and do that resistance and my focus on that actual training, that is huge, and that's such a help. And I try to do it several times a week.
I had always wanted to do triathlon, and I said, I'd love to do that, but I just don't have time. And someone said, well, do you take a lunch break at work? I said, well, I eat, but I don't actually take a lunch break. And I said, well, take a lunch break. So I started swimming at lunch, and I found that my productivity for the afternoon at work was better. My mood at home was better if I'm stressed with the kids, so that everything, and then I carried that. That started before my dad had the diagnosis, but I carried it with me, and it's something that I tried to make it non-negotiable in my day or in my week. A couple of
That's
times
very
a week.
interesting. And that resonates with you, Tracy, in terms of exercise and the impact of it.
Yeah, and for my husband John as well, he's a marathon runner, and that was his saving grace in the early days with Willow. Men don't talk in general, they hold everything so
Sure.
internal. The women can be emotional, we can cry and release, and we do hold as well, but running saved him.
Right.
And for the really difficult times, there was times where, it was just so awful, so hard, so challenging, John just ran and he'd process everything in his runs. I mean, he'd be gone running 3 hours Saturday and Sunday morning doing his long runs, and that was just his space, just to, let everything just kind of process in his
Sure.
head and come home and feel that little bit more relaxed and freer in his thoughts as well,
So, Trudy, this isn't a surprise, is it? Because there's a huge evidence base behind this, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so you're getting your mood improvements with your activity, and then everybody mentioned mindfulness by accident. So there's a huge research body for the benefits of mindfulness for carers. But again, mindfulness takes a lot of practice. It's not easy to do when you're busy, but there are activities that bring you into mindfulness. And Tracy mentioned that when you're in the gym and you get into the flow and you have the deep pressure and you kind of come out of your head a bit. And essentially, to be in a mindful state is to come out of your kind of monkey mind, the thoughts that are going around all the time, and get into that sense of flow.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the second piece, that mindfulness piece, but to do it in a way that's realistic and that's doable. And for some people that might be you get out of yourself in the pool or in the gym. A lot of people talk about going to art spaces, and you might be able to bring the person you're caring for with you.
And there's an evidence base behind the arts, isn't
Exactly.
there?
So there's a lovely body of research behind looking at either making art, like being somebody who makes art, but also somebody who just observes and participates in looking at or receiving art.
Okay, interesting.
And partly because it takes you into that flow state, it takes you out of yourself and it helps clear your mind and take you away from the worries. And
Sure.
that's really helpful. We need that break,
Yeah.
that pause button. And like you have said before, stepping out of autopilot.
Right.
That constantly running, I have to do. And Eoin mentioned it, when he took breaks to go swimming, his productivity and work went up.
Yeah.
And there's research to show that if we take a break, and go for a walk, if we take a break and do something creative for 20 minutes, your productivity and work actually goes up,
Yeah.
not down.
Right, so it's kind of, because autopilot is so common for human beings, we all do it, but especially in very stressful scenarios like these, where you are thinking about other people, I'm sure, on a 24/7 basis. It's so important to stop that, come into the present moment, and I think that's where you begin to find yourself again, but that's really hard, I'd imagine, you know, depending on what your situation is. We could talk for the next week about these evidence-based strategies. They're there, they don't have to be complicated, do they?
Yeah.
They can be simple, like what you were just saying there, Trudy. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to finish now by getting maybe one or two tips for anybody listening, anybody watching, from all three of you. And if we start with you, Tracy, if that's okay. If you're thinking about somebody out there, and there are going to be thousands of people out there who are resonating with you and your story, if you could give something that, you know, is important to you, that you know works, in terms of advice, one or two things.
I think I would really just say allow yourself have those feelings, because there's this ever-consuming guilt around those thoughts, those feelings, that this is too hard, do I have to go on? I mean, when I was in hospital with Willow last week, I was like, how much more do we have to do? Every time it just feels heavier because she's getting older and I'm more conscious that her needs will get bigger. And you can sit with those feelings and just allow them, because they'll pass, and just not be consumed by the guilt, and know that there's somebody else out there feeling that as well, and it's okay. You know, I've had really dark thoughts where
Sure.
I've just wanted not to get up tomorrow, and you know, it's just that fleeting thought, but it's that release, that need to just remove that pressure from yourself, and it's okay, it just fleets, and it's just a way of walking through that moment, because it is really hard, and you're watching someone you love, and it's your dad or it's my daughter, and someone that you really love and you really care about, not being able to be that person that they were or that they were meant to be. And that is grief, and that is okay, and just allow those feelings and just move through it.
In that present moment as best we can.
Yeah.
That's hugely powerful. Thanks very much. For you, Trudy, one or two tips for...
Yeah, I think just building on what Tracy said, the other side of that guilt and that pain is the love that drives it. You feel so much love that it hurts so much when you see all of those things. So sometimes just as when you feel the pain, remember the love behind it.
Yeah.
And because the positive emotion can go beside the hard emotion.
Will you say that again, right, for me, please? Because that's a really, really important point to emphasize. Yeah.
Just like as therapists, and you know as well, often people go to therapy to get rid of all their bad feelings.
Right.
And we can't do that. It's unrealistic.
Yeah.
Life's hard. And what's more realistic is to have all the hard feelings and then maybe bring in some good ones. But they can exist together. You can be in deep, deep pain because you're in so like strong love. And those two things are both true at the same time.
Yeah.
And sometimes just anchoring in on the good, positive feeling can allow you to tolerate the bad, because that love is holding you there.
Yeah.
You know, that's just one thing. And the other thing I would say, and Tracy mentioned it with connection, you're very vulnerable when you're a carer and when you first enter that space. So I think it's important to find your tribe, because there's so many different ways of talking about all the different conditions and so many different approaches. Yeah. And you can be very upset by different people's opinions, and nobody's story is the same as yours. So you've got to find people where you feel safe with and where you don't feel judged. And it can be hard, it can take some time, and you might have to come out of spaces because you don't feel safe, or you don't feel that it's the right way, or it's not in line with your values of caring.
Right. So would you advise people really to go looking for your tribe then? Is that, yeah.
Go looking. It's okay if you don't find them at first,
sure,
but they are there. And when you find them, it's worth finding them.
Right.
You know, and it might be just one person is your tribe, but that's all you need, just one or two people. And it can make all the difference and make the path a bit easier.
And relieve that kind of isolation that you might feel.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Trudy. So Eoin, for you then, one or two tips?
I suppose just before that, maybe there's a part that I didn't mention as one of the sort of challenges, and
sure,
you brought it up there, and again, following on from what Trudy said, the guilt around it, around, you know, being the person responsible for my dad's care and not being able to directly care for him, and that's a huge, that for me, and tying in with the piece about finding your tribe. When I've spoken to friends who are in a similar position, that's a massive thing for them, and I think accepting the fact that you just can't, you know, you just can't physically be the one-to-one for that parent. Not everybody, but for a lot of people, you know, if you have young kids and a family,
sure,
I think that can be a very difficult thing for a lot of people to accept, but I think we need to.
And do you think, is that why that word carer, you'd feel like, oh,
yeah,
like, what is it? What, you don't deserve to be called a carer? Or
I think so.
Yeah.
And that probably, yeah, it's sort of coming around full circle
sure,
again. But
so the word carer, you know, it can be used in so many different ways, but I think it's kind of become a bit of a negative word, you know. We have different, you know, I suppose, levels of care, and people are part-time carers, but we all care, you know, and like it's reshaping that word, isn't it? And how we view it and how we use it and how we see it. You know, we care. You care for your dad, I care for my husband, I care for my child, you know, and it's to remove the negativity around the word as well.
I find that as well with Dad, that there are often people, sometimes it's family, sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's somebody else, and they've different opinions. Sometimes they're aligned and sometimes they're not, and sometimes they're sort of forcibly not and vocally not, and again, speaking to friends who may have been in a similar position, they also find that can be kind of hard to deal with. And I think you just have to try and take, in the case of somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia, you know, take their consultants' advice and try and make the best decisions you can.
Right, but I imagine it's quite hard sometimes to deal with many opinions.
None of us are qualified in this role, you know, it's an ever-evolving thing.
Sure.
And I think the thing that always sits with me as well is allowing Willow's choice.
Right.
You know, because we'd have so many opinions and so many, we're obviously involved in so many different medical aspects, and she's got so many consultants, but I'll always bring it back to her, that really the choice is her, and we, you know, person-centred care, the person has to be the centre of everything we do, and it can be hard to make those decisions and, you know, plan for their future or for their immediate care, but just always try to bring it back to that person that you're caring for and what you feel would be best for them. Everybody has an opinions, we all have opinions, and we're all walking this day to day and just blagging it really, because none of us are qualified.
Sure.
There's nobody going to college and coming out qualified as a carer for that specific role, because it's ever evolving. So it's allowing yourself, you know, you can make mistakes or you can make the right choices, but once you're doing the best for that person, you're doing your best.
So it comes back down to love again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you agree with that, Eoin?
Yeah, I think, yeah, in terms of somebody with dementia, having them as you know, as much as possible, having them to make decisions and assist them in making decisions
Sure.
where they can. Unfortunately, it gets to a stage where that starts becoming more difficult.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I think the person at the end of the day has to be the centre of
Yeah.
the decision making.
Well, I think that's a really important place to end it. We're really grateful for Eoin, Trudy and Tracy for joining us this evening. I'm sure there are many thousands of people watching and listening to this episode that these stories will resonate very strongly. Remember, there are lots of resources connected to the site, so please go onto the site and have a look at those resources. Remember to look after yourself, remember to be kind, and we'll see you next time.